organic farming is steadily increasing. That's good.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse.
Der Klimawandel erfasst immer weitere Teile der Welt.
Farmers help us bring nature back and preserve biodiversity.
Ceux qui sont dans le rouge s'en sortent quand ils font plus vert.
La qualité dans ce pays, elle doit être là pour tous.
1,167 square centimetres of space, all to yourself, about the size of a doormat. Well, in this age of social distancing, it's not good enough for humans. But for a hen laying organic eggs, it's the minimum they can expect thanks to EU legislation. In fact, behind the reassurance offered by, say, an organic egg, lies a battery, excuse the pun, of regulatory measures to create an open and transparent market with minimum standards. Welcome to this, the second episode of Food for Europe, a series of podcasts from the European Commission's Directorate General of Agriculture and Rural Development, shining a spotlight on organic farming and food. My principal guest for this episode is the Director General of DG AGRI, Wolfgang Burtscher. And he began by discussing the substance of the new EU legal framework for organic food, which will come into force next January.
What we have done in this legislation is to look at the deficiencies and weaknesses and gaps of the existing legislation, and we have tried to improve. The result is, to make a long story short, is that we provide with this new legal framework evolution and not a revolution. You know, our objective is 25% of agricultural land in Europe covered by organic farming. So we need to provide incentives for farmers to become organic farmers, and not only big ones, but also small ones. We have gone for a so-called group certification that permits reducing administrative burden for farmers who want to adhere to the system. So I think that's one important element. The second element in terms of changes is that since the demand for organic production is increasing, we have also to cover sectors that have been not covered until now, like sectors like salt, like cork, like cotton, like essential oils are points that we have covered. But the sector felt we need more detailed rules, and I'm coming back to the question of overregulation. For example, what are the key elements for an organic rabbit, an organic deer? And I think, again, here the new rules provide more clarity.
But it took the Council and the Parliament a long time to digest the Commission's proposal, and they came up with so many changes of their own. How challenging was that?
Just to give you a flavor of the length of the procedure, the Commission has proposed a new legislative framework in 2014, and the trilogue negotiations amongst the co-legislators were only finalized in 2018. So it shows that this was a quite challenging endeavor to find a compromise amongst the different interests of member states, of European Parliament, of stakeholders. And to give you an example of one of the areas where it was difficult to find a compromise was, for example, the presence of non-authorized products like pesticide in an organic product. So here it was about the level of non-authorized products present, but in particular also about the question how to control it, who controls it, and what should be done if in a product non-authorized ingredients are discovered. This was just one example of an area where it was difficult to find a compromise.
Well, I also spoke to Martin Häusling, a German Green MEP who was the European Parliament's rapporteur on this dossier, and here's how he characterized the 4 years of discussions.
Es war nicht einfach.
It wasn't easy, as the length of the negotiations demonstrated, because there was no great willingness to reform. Because, for example, many organic associations said, we only need a few EU regulations, we do everything ourselves. The big organic associations in particular then said, well, the European Union has to stay out of that, we define that. Importers then said, we don't want the European standard at all, because there are difficulties with imports. There was little enthusiasm, so to speak, for a reform under the banner of redefining organic farming. It caused a lot of anger and annoyance within the organic scene because they were afraid that we would move away from the systemic approach to a purely pollutant-oriented approach. During the negotiations, we also noticed how great the differences actually are in the individual member states. There are 3 countries where, for example, this zero definition, 0.0, is organic, so completely residue-free. Italy, Belgium, and the Czech Republic. They still have the system and they insisted on it, while other countries said this doesn't work. That's why there were big differences among the EU's member states. Back to Herr Burtscher. Given all the various interests at play during that process of crafting the regulation, to what extent are you concerned about actually having done too much, about over-regulation?
We are in a single market, and organic production and the trading of organic products is becoming a very important element. So you need to ensure a level playing field. It is not conceivable that the standards for organic farming are different for farmers in different member states. So I think, again, we have a very good case why we need to regulate organic farming on the European level in order to ensure a level playing field in the single market. And then there is the question whether we have overregulated. And I think here we have to take into consideration also the demands of the stakeholders, of farmers, of traders, of consumers. And everybody is calling for a quite detailed set of rules exactly in order to ensure that we have this level playing field. Because if you are not specific enough in determining the responsibilities and obligations of farmers, you might create advantages for farmers who have to meet lower standards.
You're focused on raising standards for organic food in Europe, but what about so-called equivalence, the standards that apply to food from third countries that's imported into the EU and can be labelled organic nonetheless? Are consumers and farmers getting a fair deal?
Indeed, I think you touch upon a question that is becoming increasingly important generally for the European Union and specifically also for the Common Agricultural Policy, because as you know, we raise the standards for our farmers, in particular in the context of the farm-to-fork strategy. And there is a concern out there that imports do not meet the same standards and requirements than our farmers have to comply with. And I think this concern is also present with respect to organic farming. And evidently there is also a big interest of consumers that imported products meet the same standards in terms of production, in terms of safety, than our organic farming products. So if you have an organic production from Switzerland, the national authorities of Switzerland confirm the equivalence of the standard. Now, with respect to countries that are not covered by such equivalence agreements, the European Commission has designated control bodies which check imports from these countries, and these certifying bodies provide assurance that the imported products are meeting or are equivalent in organic terms, production methods, to our production.
That was Wolfgang Burtscher, the Director General of DG AGRI. A reminder that the first episode in this series is available for download on DG AGRI's website in English, French and German. And the third episode, coming shortly, will be looking at organic labelling in the EU. For now, that's all from me. Goodbye.
Organic farming is steadily increasing. That's good.
Pour parler d'agriculture et d'Europe à la jeunesse,
Der Klimawandel erfasst immer weitere Teile der Welt.
Farmers help us bring nature back and preserve biodiversity.
Ceux qui sont dans le rouge s'en sortent quand ils font plus vert.
La qualité dans ce pays, elle doit être là pour tous.